Good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me okay. This is Keith Hewlin from Ascent Geomatics Solutions. We're pleased to have all of you joining us today. Before we get started, I wanted to make just a couple notes. The first one being that we are recording this session, so we can post it to our website, and if for whatever reason you need to jump off, you're always going to be able to come back and check it out at a later time. The second thing I wanted to mention is that if some of you are not familiar with GoToWebinar, in the top right-hand corner there is an arrow, and if you click on that arrow, it should show a little dialog box that says questions. At any time as we're going through this, if you have any types of questions that you'd like to submit, please just go ahead and type those in and just hit the send button, and then we'll get those and we'll be addressing all the questions towards the end. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So as I mentioned, my name is Keith Hewlin. I am the Director of Business Development here at Ascent, and I wanted to welcome everybody here to our first official webinar of 2017. In truth, this is actually our first official webinar we've ever hosted. So if it goes well, we'll continue to do more of these in the future. And if it doesn't go well, then you will have had the privilege of joining the one and only Ascent webinar. No, I'm kidding, of course. The reason I know this is going to go well is because of the next person that I want to introduce to you all, which is our main presenter and really our subject matter expert on the timely topic of WOGLA. So today, let's talk about WOGLA, and I want to introduce you to Ann Stevens. So let me give a quick, you want to say hi, Ann?
Hi, everyone. Good morning.
Let me give a quick background on Ann. So Ann joined the Ascent team back in March of 2013, and currently she leads the regulatory department as the regulatory manager. This means that she's basically in charge of ensuring all of the permits are submitted, approved, and issued by all the regulatory agencies so our customers can conduct their oil and gas operations. Since joining Ascent, Ann has successfully permitted, I guess close to probably 500 oil and gas wells in Colorado and Wyoming for projects that include oil and gas well pads and facilities and pipelines and compressor stations and probably a whole bunch of other things for federal, state, and local regulatory agencies.
Okay.
So Ann has, and it's funny because she looks like she's 28, but she does have over 35 years in the oil and gas industry, bringing experience in a wide range of areas from well operations and regulatory compliance to financial and project management, contract negotiation, and even investor relations. And this includes extensive experience permitting wells in Colorado, Wyoming, New Mexico, Utah, California, Texas, Louisiana. Did I miss any states?
No, that's about right.
And prior to joining Ascent, Ann worked for Veneco, Aspect Energy, and Edwards Energy Corporation in different various roles surrounding regulatory matters. So, one other important note I think everybody should know is that you're also a licensed massage therapist and studied Chinese medicine.
Yes, that's true.
Okay, so let's go through our game plan for today. This is going to be the overview here of what we're going to cover. We realize that most of the people on this call are from the oil and gas industry. However, many of you may or may not have started digging into the details around this new process in Weld County. And we don't want to make any assumptions about what people already know regarding WOGLA. So we'll start with the basics and just kind of move into more detail throughout the presentation. And we'll start by going through the purpose, which we'll cover here in just a moment, talk a little bit about what it is, what are some of the requirements, what do the timelines look like, who's going to be affected, and then just some tips and helpful hints at the end to help you all as you move forward in this process. So, with that, let's go ahead and jump into our first area here, which is going to be the purpose. So, Ann, maybe you could give us just a little background on WOGLA, describe the purpose, talk a little bit about who this new process actually affects.
Sure, but first, as you mentioned, there may be a few people online that are not familiar with the industry. I'm going to be using a couple of acronyms that I thought I would explain first. One is COGCC, which stands for the State Regulatory Agency, the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, and USR permit, which stands for Use by Special Review Permit. So as you mentioned, I'm going to start with a little bit of background as to how the WOGLA came to be. In 2014, the governor formed a task force as a way to defer the then ballot initiatives that were conceived by anti-fracking groups. In October 2015, that task force proposed changes to state rules, their recommendations 17 and 20, that addressed more local government consultation with respect to oil and gas location siting authority. A couple of months later, in December 2015, the Weld County Board of County Commissioners, which I might refer to as the BOCC, started pitching a use by special review permit process. That's what I mentioned, the USR, in response to these proposed COGCC rules. The BOCC began discussions with industry partners to discuss this new permit process, which they hoped would address the same siting authority issues within their county's jurisdiction. Weld County is of the belief that the state's overreach when it came to siting authority needed to be addressed from the county level, since the county is the regulatory agency for land use authority, versus the COGCC's mission statement, which is to protect correlative rights. By January 2016, a year ago last month already, the COGCC adopted their new rules, and that's when Weld County proposed the USR permit process to the industry for all oil and gas locations within their county's boundaries. We spent all of last year negotiating with Weld County, and fast forward to December 2016, and the industry was able to negotiate what Weld County calls a use by right process, which is an administrative approval process versus the board approval process associated with the USR, and the WOGLA was born. This WOGLA process pertains to all operators wishing to build oil and gas locations in Weld County, basically for upstream projects. And you will need both an approved COGCC Form 2A and an approved county WOGLA in order to move dirt.
Great. Okay. Well, why don't we move in then and talk a little bit about some of the requirements. So, but before we do that, let's talk a little bit about what is WOGLA. So let's start with the basics. What is a WOGLA?
Sure. And
what does it mean for the oil and gas operators?
Well, WOGLA stands for Weld Oil and Gas Location Assessment. Everybody who's familiar with the industry should be familiar with the COGCC's Form 2A WOGLA, Oil and Gas Location Assessment, which is the permit required to build oil and gas locations in the state. So the WOGLA is now the process required and approved WOGLA from Weld County in order to build oil and gas locations within the county boundaries. WOGLA is their new review process for these oil and gas locations within Weld County zone districts via use by right, as I mentioned, as opposed to the more cumbersome and lengthy USR. The intent behind WOGLA, Weld County had intended to mirror the COGCC rules and regulations for notices and exhibits, so operators would not be burdened by additional permitting regulations. Although there are some differences, as many are aware, and what I'll do is I'll start with Weld County's definitions of the basic terms. We'll start with building unit, and that is basically the same as the COGCC's definition in their rules. So that's pretty much the same. Oil and gas facility, I'm actually going to read this from the Weld County Code. Equipment or improvements used or installed for the exploration, production, withdrawal, gathering, treatment, or processing of oil or natural gas, excluding pipeline natural gas, and excluding pipeline petroleum products other than natural gas, and all other pipelines and flow lines used or installed at the oil and gas industry. And I emphasize the exception or the exclusion as this is pretty much upstream versus midstream projects.
Okay.
The definition continues, the footprint of the oil and gas facility shall match the final location on the interim reclamation area shown on the COGCC's Form 2A. So that's oil and gas facility. WOGLA's, the code definition for oil and gas location shall mean the definable areas where an operator has disturbed or intends to disturb the land surface in order to locate an oil and gas facility for the purposes of obtaining a WOGLA pursuant to the Division 10 of the code. So those are the three basic definitions which are pertinent to who must be consulted for the siting of the oil and gas locations and brings in the local governments with their land use authority.
Okay, very good. Well, why don't we then move on to some of the requirements. So in this piece, obviously, this is kind of the how behind it. So let's talk about the how and how to work through this process. Maybe you could start by telling us a little bit about the process, you know, what are the notices looking like, and maybe any other type of deliverables associated with working through the WOGLA process.
Okay, as with the state permitting, the WOGLA has similar requirements to its process. The WOGLA notice parallels the COGCC's pre-application notice for surface owner and building unit owners, both of which have a notice period that gives a time frame for the notice recipients to respond, either with a request for consultation to discuss the plans for the location or to address their concerns. The state's notice period is 30 days from receipt. The WOGLA notice period is 28 days from receipt. And similar to the state's pre-app, the WOGLA notice is sent to all building unit owners within 1,000 feet of the oil and gas location, but also must be sent to the Weld County LGD and any proximate local governments within 1,000 feet of the oil and gas location. Enclosures with the WOGLA notice include a notification zone drawing that depicts property owners within 1,000 feet, an access road map, and a location drawing depicting all visible improvements within 1,000 feet as well. And here I must mention some of the differences between the state and county exhibits. The notification zone drawing is pretty much the same, where building unit owners within 1,000 feet of the oil and gas location are both noticed for state and for this WOGLA. However, the location drawing is different for state and county WOGLA requirements. Though the state only requires visible improvements depicted on their location drawing within 500 feet of the location, the county is requiring all visible improvements be depicted within 1,000 feet of the location. So that's the notice. Once the 28-day response period has lapsed, the WOGLA application can then be submitted. The application form is available now on the Weld County website and eventually will be set up to be submitted electronically, like state COGCC permit applications are submitted electronically. But for now, it must be filled out and mailed or emailed. Weld County has included a checklist with the application form, and a list of requirements for the application is also stated in the code. Some of the enclosures for the WOGLA application is a final location drawing depicting the oil and gas facility and disturbed area after collaboration with property owners, building unit owners, the Weld County LGD, and sorry, the LGD stands for Local Government Designate, and proximate municipal local governments, have they been brought into the discussions. Also included in the application, there are 3 different certifications by the operator pertaining to surface use and notice requirements, a traffic plan, and some other basics like BMPs, etc. Hopefully, everyone who wanted to avoid the WOGLA process submitted their COGCC Form 2As by yesterday. If not, there are some exceptions provided by the new code, such as you will not need a WOGLA for routine well operations. You will not need a WOGLA for a one-time expansion or enlargement of your location by less than 50%. Also, if you are making repairs or maintenance required by state or federal compliance order. However, you were able to avoid the WOGLA process had you submitted all your Form 2As to the COGCC by yesterday.
Got it. Okay, well that's actually a great segue now into talking a little bit about timeline. So let's talk timing. When does this take effect? Obviously you just kind of, well, you did allude to that earlier a couple times. Today is the big day. How long will it take to move through this process? How long is it good for? Let's talk about timing aspects like that.
Okay, well, as I mentioned, and you just reiterated, the effective date for submitting or starting to submit WOGLAs is today, February 2nd. Weld County has a flow chart on their website that explains the whole process from the time the WOGLA notice is sent to when the WOGLA is approved, and they've approximated that timeline at 45 days. This includes, as I'm told, the 28-day notice period and 7 days allotted for their completeness review by the planning department. However, should the oil and gas site present issues about which the planning director cannot approve administratively, which is the purpose behind the WOGLA, the application is then referred to the BOCC, which can add up to an additional 45 days for approval. So essentially, you can get a WOGLA within 45 days, or it could be as extensive as 90. Once approved, the WOGLA is effective for 3 years. It can be extended by submitting a written request for good cause to the planning director. I'm not quite sure what that extension would be.
Okay, so that's timeline.
That's pretty much the timeline.
Easy. Okay, so let's talk then a little bit about advice that you may have for the operators that are on the webinar today and how best to navigate through this new process in the most effective manner.
Well, first, the WOGLA process is brand new, starting today.
Yep.
I don't think anyone has actually submitted any applications as of yet, but I've had several conversations and meetings with Troy Swain, who is the Weld County LGD, the local government designee, and he's given us some very good guidance with respect to the WOGLA process and getting applications approved timely and efficiently. And since this is a brand new process, Weld County is pretty much going to be following the letter of the code. In discussions with industry partners, we have come up with some discrepancies that don't actually mirror COGCC rules and regulations. But in speaking with Troy, any of these issues that come up over the next 6 months, Weld County plans on reviewing the entire process, the good and the bad, within 6 months. So we're just going to be keeping track of any kind of issues that we may have or experience. Other tips that Troy gave us is he will accept WOGLA applications via email, so we can avoid the snail mail opportunity there.
Well, and that's great too, because the COGCC today, obviously they accept more through an electronic system, so this is more of a direct email.
Correct.
Which is nice. Until
Weld County gets their system set up for submitting these WOGLAs electronically,
okay.
We'll have to do it by email, which is still great. Also, we all will come upon sites that do not have any building units or proximate local governments within that 1,000-foot boundary for the WOGLA notice. And if Troy is the only one noticed, then he said he'd be willing to waive the 28-day response period on a case-by-case basis. So as with the state pre-app process, there is a way to shorten the submittal, application submittal time frame, that you won't necessarily have to wait the 28 days. The last thing, which I think is a helpful hint, is since the WOGLA location drawing requires visible improvements within 1,000 feet of the oil and gas location, as opposed to the location drawing we submit to the state with the Form 2A, Troy gave me some guidance as far as clarification for gathering cultural features within this 1,000 feet. And he wrote, regarding visible improvements and survey access, the 1,000-foot distance must be followed as stated in the code. Visible improvements outside the COGCC standards normal mapping areas or off-lease areas that an operator may not have access to can also be identified and measured using means other than survey, such as aerial photo or aerial imagery, such as Google Earth, the Weld County GIS, or the COGCC GIS map. The on-site activities should allow enough observation of these proximate areas outside the 500 feet to identify newer visible improvements that are not on the aerials. So I think that was really great guidance that I got from Troy as far as the difference between the two location drawings.
Okay. Okay, great. Any other helpful hints?
Oh, the one other thing that Troy mentioned is, since this is kind of a period, a gray area between when a WOGLA is required and when it was not, he suggested that when you go to apply for a building permit at Weld County, to bring a copy of your your approved Form 2A for your location if a WOGLA was not required. That just will help them look things up in their database and know that a WOGLA was not required, so it won't hold up the process for a building permit.
Okay, very good, very good. Those are definitely some very helpful hints. So, that's a great segue actually, as we talk about the helpful hints and some of the different areas that people are going to need to address in the new process, we thought it'd be good to just throw in some helpful solutions. So we've jotted down just a couple notes here. One being these 1,000-foot visible improvements. So with the location drawings now encompassing 1,000 feet, in addition to the 500 feet required for the COGCC, one area that this can be addressed through is the use of UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, or as they're commonly referred to as drones. They can be a really fast, safe, and effective way of gathering that extended area. And the other big thing about it is obviously they're going to be giving up-to-date aerial imagery on those visible improvements, right? So as we all know, and using Google Earth, sometimes it can be a couple months old and sometimes it can be a couple years old. And so, getting an up-to-date, as maybe your survey teams are on site, getting that with the use of drones is a really quick and easy way to gather that extended area. The second area is regulatory rapport. So obviously the different folks on the phone, if you do have a regulatory department, having that good relationship is pretty key. We obviously have a very close relationship with the regulatory agency, in this case being Weld County, as you can tell. Ann's had multiple conversations with Troy and others. So this can be really important to satisfying these additional requirements and just making sure that you understand what is required and making it move through the process much more efficiently. Streamlining the process is the third item here. And this really goes to developing a process because everything really should have a process as you're working through these regulatory items. And so developing a process for submitting complete permits the first time with things like checklists and just following the code is really going to help to ensure you're submitting everything right, which should expedite the process overall, which is obviously what everybody's wanting to do. And last but not least is just having a team or a company that has that detailed surveying eye when they're out on the location. So making sure you have the right survey crew that can identify utility lines and buildings and streams and ponds and ditches and all those other items found during their collection of 2A features and section breakdown and topo gathering is obviously really important. And you know, sometimes obviously organizations will just kind of go and kind of take in the shots or just kind of do what's required of them. So having that survey crew that's able to take a look at everything else that's around them can really be helpful. So I'd be remiss at this point if I didn't mention that Ascent obviously addresses all of these different solutions, and we'd be happy to work with you all if you have questions about that. So let's review what we've gone through today and just kind of recap the highlights. The big item obviously is, what was the purpose of this? Why did this come about? What is the WOGLA? What are the requirements? So how do you actually work through it? What do the timelines look like? Today obviously is a timely day because this is when everything kicks off. Who is affected by this? And then just some tips and tricks to help everybody. So at this point, what I'd like to do is go to questions that we may have. And it looks like we've had a few questions come in here. So let me pull these up. And you're off the hook for a second, Ann, while I pull these up here. And we will get a few of these. Here we go. All right, let's see what we got here. So one question is, other discrepancies found in the new code ?
Oh, okay. Yes, there are a couple of discrepancies that we did mention. One was the difference in the location drawing required by the WOGLA as opposed to the requirements for the state location drawing. That was the difference between the 500 feet and the 1,000 feet. And there's also some verbiage in the definition of the notices, the WOGLA notice that is required. The definition or the code reads that WOGLA has a WOGLA notice is sent to building unit owners within 1,000 feet of the oil and gas location and sent to Weld County local government and local government designees for municipalities located within 1,000 feet of the oil and gas facility. So those are two different discrepancies in the new code that we will address going forward with Troy.
Okay. Let's move to our next question here. What happens if you submit a location drawing with a 500-foot radius of visible improvements?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the code does require visible improvements, but the code does require their location drawing depict visible improvements within 1,000 feet of the oil and gas location, which is how we here at Ascent will be proceeding.
Okay, so basically, that might almost be a better question maybe for Troy, right? If you have questions, call Weld County and ask how they would handle a location drawing that comes in at 500 feet. But as Ann said, we're gonna follow the code here as we submit these. Okay, next question. What happens if you don't have any building units within 1,000 feet?
I did mention in the presentation that there will be sites out in the middle of nowhere that you will not have any building unit owners, you will not have any proximate local governments that are brought in by the 1,000-foot radius. And the only notice required will be for Troy Swain, the Weld County LGD. And I talked to Troy, and if he is the only one that gets noticed, you can give him a call and review the oil and gas site with him, and he is actually might be willing to waive that 28-day response period. So you'd be able to submit your WOGLA application a lot sooner.
Okay, very good. Next question. can we combine the pre-app with the WOGLA notice? And I'm guessing by pre-app they're talking about the COGCC pre-app.
Correct. As I mentioned, Weld County really wanted to mirror the state regulations so there wouldn't have to be any additional permitting requirements. And the notice is one of those, similar to the COGCC pre-app that is sent. And Troy told me that as long as the notice includes all the requirements per the code, then he is fine if we combine both the state and the county notice.
Okay, very good. Next question. Is that 45 business days or 45 calendar days?
I believe it's 45 business days.
Okay.
Because the response periods, both for state and county, are based on the receipt date, not when you mailed the notice, but when you receive it. And state is 30 days from the date of receipt, and those are calendar days. So without having had checked with Troy, I'm pretty sure the 28-day response period is calendar days.
45.
The 45 days, yes,
Yep.
would be calendar days.
Calendar day. Got it. Okay. Next question. Will Troy accept 28-day waivers for the pre-apps from building unit owners?
We did talk about that, and that is possible. However, it needs to be something a little bit more detailed than just a letter waiver. He would like to make sure that the building unit owners know exactly what they're waiving. So that may entail a more detailed waiver. But that's something that we would have to discuss with Troy as well.
Okay.
It is, in short, it is possible.
Okay.
It could be possible, yes.
Everything's possible, right?
Right.
Okay. Great. Well, let's move on. That's all I had for questions at this point, and just for the sake of time, let's move on to the last item here, which is I want to mention that we're going to be hosting a lunch and learn. This is going to be March 14th, and we're working with the Denver Petroleum Club. It's going to be at the Denver Athletic Club, and this is going to be just talking about the updates and kind of the future of WOGLA as we move through it. You know, we're working through this process like all of you are on the line here for the first time. Just so we luckily have had the support and guidance by the folks at Weld County, which is really helping to shorten our learning curve. But we're going to know a lot more about this process in 6 weeks from now than we do today. And so we should have some more best practices to share at that time. We should have more information. And in addition to Ann speaking, we've also been able to have a representative from KOGA, Ashley Campbell, is going to be joining us. And we're working on possibly having one other guest speaker join us for that lunch and learn. So we would certainly invite all of you to join us for that and have a nice lunch and learn a little bit more about this process, especially as we've all started submitting applications. So if you have any questions about anything that we covered today that you think of afterwards, or if you are interested in getting any type of assistance here, you know, this is obviously new, but as you can tell, Ann's got a great relationship with all the regulatory agencies, in this case, Weld County, and we've been working through this process already, and so we're somewhat knowledgeable about the best practices as far as the most efficient ways to move through this. And so we'd be happy to talk to you about that. You know, I talked about some of the detailed surveying and the drones, and obviously we'd be happy to talk with you all about that. So if you just have any questions at all, or you're just curious, and if there's any way we can help you at all, there's my contact information, phone number, and email. Last but not least, we're going to send out a detailed PowerPoint to all of the attendees today. So that's not the PowerPoint that you've been looking at here on the screen, but it's actually going to be one that has a lot of the notes that Ann has been talking through here. So we'll send that out to all of you like I said, this has been a recorded webinar, so we're going to post this to our website. And with that, Ann, anything else that you want to add here that you thought of as I was going through the closing statements here?
Actually not.
No? Okay.
I covered everything I wanted to.
Great. Well, I want to thank you, Ann, first of all. That was excellent. Thanks for doing all the research and summing all of that up here in 41 minutes. And I'm sure it was helpful for a lot of the folks on the phone that haven't had the time to really kind of dive into this very much. So thank you.
I hope so. You're welcome.
And as I mentioned, we'll have more to come in our Lunch and Learn, so please join us for that. And with that, we'll go ahead and end the webinar. And I want to thank you all for the time. Thanks again, and we'll see you on the next webinar.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the day.